Hi, everybody. Welcome to Synthetic Intelligence Forum Online. And today it's my pleasure to welcome a special guest to our live stream. Jake Flomenberg is a partner at Wing VC out in the Silicon Valley. And they are a very well-known and a highly respected venture capital firm that invests in early stage and seed level ventures focusing on applied artificial intelligence, data science, machine learning, reinforcement learning, you name it. So very happy to have Jake join us and make time in his busy schedule. And I know that a lot of the folks that come to the Synthetic Intelligence Forum are entrepreneurs or they're intrapreneurs, and they're always thinking about, how do you value an artificial intelligence startup? And then people always kind of on the other side of the table, which is the entrepreneurs and founders are always thinking, how do VCs look at our ideas and our execution, and how do they actually ascribe a value? So very happy to have Jake here. And Jake, without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to you and I'm going to project your slides. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you so much, Vic, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed watching some of your previous productions, and I think I must have the distinction of having the least technically savvy background of anyone that's been on the show. So hopefully I can still share some perspective. And so what I'm going to do here today is really talk about how I evaluate an early stage AI based company. And to do that, I think I needed to spend a minute to give you first a little context on who Wing and I are, and then walk you through a little bit of background in terms of how I think about things. And then I'll step through some examples. And I hope to move through the material reasonably quickly so that we have lots of time for Q&A at the end. And so for starters, Wing is an early stage venture capital firm. We invest in seed and Series A financings. We like to say that we invest in the modern enterprise, which is an agile workplace built on data and powered by AI. Built on data, it's pretty self-explanatory: cloud infrastructure, cloud data platforms, AI tooling. We're early investors in companies like Snowflake in this regard. Powered by AI, business applications that are powered by AI to help improve a process. Gong is a great example of that. And enabling a modern workplace. As AI reshapes the apps that people use, it also transforms the way that they do work, the models of work that are more, to models of work that are more effective, flexible, and hopefully fulfilling. And whether that's via APIs, low code, new collaboration tools, or, et cetera. My background, I was a semi-useful software engineer once upon a time, had product roles in the early days of companies like Cloudera and Splunk, and so have been thinking about how to leverage data for a very long time. And it's been a pleasure to build out Wing over the last couple of years. And so to kick things off, I probably have to edit this slide here and say ML is a more precise and correct term, in my humble opinion, for what's going on today, at least in much of the startup scene, and candidly, a good number of our investments. And while I would be happy with this corrected title, the media has sensationalized what's going on with AI to such an extent that publicly calling our companies or strategy ML focus would somehow come off as less than or diminutive, and so we don't do it. There's the normal joke: if it's written in Python, it's called machine learning. If it's done in PowerPoint, it's called AI. And so for today, I guess we can call it AI. I sometimes I walk through a few slides to explain a few concepts to people. I don't think I'm going to do that with this audience. I do think I'll make the point that the term AI, at least in the sense of like public discourse, perhaps not scientific, has lost all meaning. It's been thrown to the wind. It's a nebulous and in vogue corporate strategy that's referenced in earning calls, yet like there are no actual details shared. All kinds of qualifiers are put on it. And I'm just not going to wade into the terminology debacle today, other than to say, abuse is definitely taking place in my humble opinion. How do I think about the things I care about? Well, I largely think about the things on the left: artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, as a set of Russian stacking dolls that nest inside each other. ML is a subset of AI, and deep learning is a subset of ML. And again, for this conversation, I'm not going to actually wade too far into the AI side of the house. And I'm also not going to wade too deeply into things like deep learning or neural networks, which I think are really cool. I do spend a lot of time on them, but for today, they're an implementation detail. They're simply a means to an end, a specific class of algorithms that lets us fulfill the promise of machine learning in a way or with a data set that wasn't possible in the past. The thing that I do care about is the basic concept of machine learning, the simple idea that an algorithm can learn as it's exposed to more data. That's what I care about at the most macro view. Software that uses data to get better at a prescribed task as it sees more and more examples. And if you take away nothing else from our conversation today, this is the concept that I care the most about. And again, from my perspective, why is this happening now? There's been plenty of AI renaissance over the years. I think this is very different in terms of the amount of value that is going to be accrued, and we'll talk more about it later. But there were a couple breakthroughs, in my opinion, that spawned much of today's AI revolution. And first, it was the simple precept that we just discussed: showing algorithms more data is more important than handcrafting perfect features for these algorithms. And it's this realization and the work around it that has made modern ML-driven apps possible. In the case of images, as I'm sure you all know, to show an algorithm data, you probably need some labeled data. There wasn't a lot of labeled data for a very long time in the image domain, and with a huge repository of hierarchically labeled data, as example here, this one from Fei Li, you can start to do a lot more things. You have people who believed in this concept that showing more data is better than handcrafting, and because of this, you specifically chose neural nets to apply to certain types of classification problems. And then honorable mention goes to the rise and availability of massive parallel computation, which made this all practical. So you have labeled data, an algorithm that's designed to learn on labeled data, and the processing power to do all this. These were three things for an awful lot of data sets that really didn't exist a decade ago. And again, the why now in the most simplest terms is because the computers got better than the humans on a subset of tasks, right? We all know the story in 2012, ImageNet, Geoffrey Hinton's team at the University of Toronto, and they beat the whole field by almost 11 percentage points. It was about almost half as better than the next best. And as the technique was refined over the years, with neural nets, we just had these breakthroughs in computer vision and NLP, which made image and audio and unstructured text processing more performant in some sense with computers than with humans. And with all of these building blocks in place, we can finally now build AI-powered apps that help end users do their jobs ever more efficiently. Okay, so what are some examples of success, and what does it look like? I think all of these are examples of experiences powered by AI, from how well Alexa understands you to how Google Photos can tell that a picture of me 20 years ago with a little bit more hair is still me, to Google, to Tesla's autopilot, to the AlphaGo, right, the Google built Go player. And while some of these things are objectively not perfect today, as a product person, I very much like that these companies tout actual product features instead of trying to market the AI itself. So just like the Intel Inside tagline, the AI is inside, right? That's sort of an implementation detail. And when I step back and think about how applications are built, I really do think we're in the midst of a sea change. Many of today's SaaS applications are data entry applications. You manually input data into a system. Most CRM and ERP user interfaces are not that much different than fancy form fills. Now they're online and hosted instead of on-prem. They're backed by databases. They enable various analytic functions, AI apps, but by contrast, greatly reduce, if not completely eliminate, the need for end users to enter data into the system. They collect data that was traditionally not collected before, in addition to everything that was. And oftentimes they're looking at data like image, audio, and video, and open data sources, and things that were just very hard to deal with in the past. A great example of this is a is a company like Gong. They look at the audio from sales conversations in this case. They also look at email and other interesting data sets. And if you think about it, they're dealing already with the hard problems. If you want to get a really great understanding of where a particular customer account is at some point, where are you going to look? In a repository like Gong, in a place like Gong, or in a CRM that has a few fields that have been updated by a sales rep. And so I think we'll see that more and more. And in some cases, you get this really great network effect from the data, where you learn from the cumulative experience of the entire customer base and find the right balance and privacy-conscious way, obviously, to share some of those learnings back to provide a better experience for each individual customer. So I don't really view AI as a subset of software, but rather I view AI as the future of software. And in the limit, this is going to impact all forms of user-facing software. The impact of AI in a certain space is largely going to be a function of two things: the amount and types of data as the first thing, and the extent of the workflow that the application supports. Users of AI-powered apps are going to enjoy enormous productivity benefits and make better decisions. If you imagine a spectrum with insights on the left and automation on the right, as these apps and systems get better, we're going to move a little bit more from insights towards automation and greater productivity gains. And if you step back and think about it for a minute, if AI-powered apps can capture even a fraction of the value being created along this dimension, then the TAM or the addressable market, the overall value of the market for this type of software for AI apps should conceivably be multiples of the TAM for traditional SaaS user-facing software, because so much more value is being provided. Where is this going to impact? What sort of spaces? Well, within the enterprise, it's already impacting every single enterprise function today, and we're just getting started. In terms of industries, it's really the same story. But not only do we see opportunity in industries that are more traditional, but I also see a lot of opportunity, what I call in the real world, things like computer vision. They will and are generating great benefit for the big tech companies inside the data center. But a lot of the practical and most exciting applications to me are out in the real world, right? Are in healthcare, are in warehouses, are in places that real work is getting done. That said, I think we have to be aware of what I call the Perma Hype, or the gratuitous marketing of AI. And I love this sort of like next little sequence. But if you look in 2018, you had deep learning at the top of the Gartner hype cycle. In 2017, the year before that, deep learning and machine learning were pretty much at the top of the hype cycle. In 2000, I think this is 2016, machine learning, it was just called machine learning, was at the top of the hype cycle. And interestingly, in 2015, machine learning was past the hype cycle, and it's not supposed to go the other way. It's supposed to go down to the trough, but it actually went back up to the top. So I don't even know what to make of that. And so what does this all mean? Well, I certainly hope it means that the abuse of the term AI continues on through this trough of disillusionment, and we can get over all of these exaggerated claims and AI for the sake of AI. Literally every company that walks through my door is an AI company, and I often joke that if it's a t-shirt company, it's AI for t-shirts, right? I'm not holding my breath that we'll get there, but I would very much hope that some of this marketing moves on. But the other point is that AI is really here to stay. It's a core part of how software applications are being built, and something that I need to think about as I evaluate every deal that I look at. And so now, with this background, I'm really gonna start digging into how I think about evaluating an AI-powered opportunity. And what you see here is a pretty basic framework, and it has three things. It has data, it has workflow, and then it has call it whatever you want, AI, ML, deep learning, fancy pants analytics, things that have just come out of academia in the last few years. We'll call the bucket really advanced analytic techniques. Most companies, it turns out, start with an emphasis on data and workflow and can crawl, walk, and run their way towards AI. And I actually think that 99% of the time, this is the right thing to do. If you don't have a unique perspective on the problem to be solved and the data that you're going to bring to the problem, it's a little bit like you're a hammer in search of a nail. If you are dealing with unstructured text, audio, video, or you sort of based on the data set you're looking at, maybe you need to take a more advanced technique out of your toolkit. And so maybe you would be halfway up or sort of at the center of this pyramid in some sense. And this is all at t equals 0. Another interesting observation I have is that if you think about companies over time, on average, they really don't get more customer and workflow centric over time. And so usually on this diagram, they can move up and to the right. They don't often move down and to the left. The down and to the left would sort of represent the perspective and workflow of the deep domain expert, and hopefully founders have one of those on the team, but it usually doesn't grow over time. You build more of it out, but you got what you got. And why would you move on this diagram? Well, it would have to be good or hopefully beneficial to someone, right? And so who are those audiences? Like one audience is your customers. You would move because you're going to offer your customers some form of better experience, or it's going to be better for you. It's going to be better for your bottom line. You're going to somehow make more money by making a move here. And I thought what I would do for the next couple minutes is just walk through a few examples, right? And I think this would get far more interesting if we had some questions. So I'm going to try to run through the rest of this and hopefully have some great dialogue. Slack got started, and it was a messaging platform. It was an asynchronous messaging platform. It was a lot about workflow. Sure, they moved some data around. And at some point, it started becoming, it was so used, it almost became overwhelming. And over the course of Slack's ride, they've built out a really phenomenal data science team, and they're putting things into place to help surface the right information to people at the right time. But they certainly didn't start that way. They built out that capability over time. Another great example of this is Uber. Uber, has this sort of supply and demand matchmaking problem. They need cars to be available to give rides when people ask for them. And in the beginning, what did they do? In many of their launch markets, they did things pretty manually. They over provisioned, right? They chose, I want the end users to have a great experience. It's okay for some drivers to sit or even get paid if they have to, because we want to offer our end users a great experience. It was a conscious decision. And over the course of their journey, they've built out tremendous capability in logistics and planning to make this market more efficient, to make the routing and logistics of everything more efficient. And so they've really moved up towards more advanced techniques, and they probably benefited everyone along the way. Facebook. Once upon a time, your Facebook news feed was temporally oriented, meaning, whatever happened, it showed up in your timeline. It happened in that order, and life was good. You could argue maybe they went off over to the right. Maybe they strayed a little bit from the workflow. Maybe not. Maybe they catered a little bit towards advertisers and ad units. And maybe they've come back, right, in recent years with some of the newer initiatives. And so against the backdrop of a few examples, this really sort of boils down to how to evaluate an AI-powered opportunity when it walks in the front door. The first part, as I really said, is to not talk about the AI. I am a computer scientist by training. I love to geek out about that stuff, but nothing bothers me more than when someone walks into the door and the first thing that they want to talk about is how great their AI algorithm is. And my response is, so what? It really has to be framed in the context of a problem to be solved. So what process or decision is whatever you're doing meaningfully automating or improving? How deeply do you actually understand the domain? There's a lot of people that think that AI or machine learning can just solve all the things. I'll just go and I'll apply this, and there's no role for domain experience. Maybe there's exceptions to this rule, but on average, I find that to be just patently wrong. And the companies that are most set up for success are people that have this balance and nuanced understanding of they have a deep appreciation for the domain, and they also understand where we can apply data and things like machine learning. And at the end of the day, in the first 5 or 10 minutes of a conversation after I'm meeting people, I'm trying to build an objective function in my head. What is this function that we are going to sort of maximize or change based on the technology that's coming through the front door, or the Zoom door at this point? And a big part of that is understanding what are the new data sets that the company is activating. Is it some data set that's been hard to access because of it's hard to manipulate until recent years? Is it was it hard to collect? And how are we putting it to good use? And I think a topic that doesn't get enough conversation in discourse is really, how does a company leverage its own data exhaust? And this is an area where I think there's an opportunity to build huge competitive moats for most enterprise software businesses. And so I'll give you an example. I work with a company in the security space. It's a company called Demisto. They help orchestrate and automate security tasks. It was eventually acquired by Palo Alto. And they plugged into the workflow of the security responders. So they got to see everything that, or most things that the security responders were typing to solve a problem. And what they could do with that data is learn in the context of a customer, right? Here are all the things you seem to keep doing. Can we automate some of that for you? And by automating 10% more of that each cycle, pretty soon you're automating a lot of things. Now, if the next company, no matter how much funding, no matter how many software engineers they had, wanted to go out and do that, there is no public repository of where these customers are clicking and what they've done, right? And so really the only way for another competitor to offer an equal experience is to go through that same sort of onboarding and learning and data collection process. And so some of the moats of just leveraging your own data exhaust can be some of the most durable moats that are out there. And then the question, really only after you've asked all of these questions about the problem to be solved, the data you want to bring, is how much AI is really necessary to solve the problem. Is this a problem that linear regression would be okay to solve, or is this a problem that needs a more advanced analytic method? And I think about this through a number of frameworks, and a very obvious one is just cost benefit, right? Hopefully there's some incremental benefit to a more advanced analytic technique, and how extreme are we talking about? Is this 100 times better? Is this 2 times better? Or is this 1.5 times better for a team of 10 really expensive PhDs, right? And in some cases, like, it's clear as day that the analysis makes sense, and others less so. What I will say as I think about this problem, it's a problem that constantly has to be reevaluated. And back in the day, you might have a situation where you're trying to build a piece of software, and you have a product manager and you have an engineer, right? You're building you want to write the spec and you want to implement the spec. And then with the consumerization of IT, maybe you add a designer to the mix, and you have someone that's writing the spec, you have someone that's thinking about the real end user experience, and you have someone that's going to build it. Today, really, I think people should think much more about the data and the plan for AI, not necessarily the AI up front, right? You really want to have someone, and maybe it's one of those three people, maybe it's a fourth person, that's really representing the data collection and advanced analytic opportunity. And planning for that at the outset is tremendously important, because if you make a design decision and collect the wrong data or in the wrong format, you can make your life much more complicated down the road. And so how much AI is truly needed to solve the problem, but thinking about the building blocks along the way so that you're prepared. And if the future of software is AI, then really there is not really such a thing as an AI only company. If you're operating up at the top of this pyramid, it'd be hard to even call you tooling for AI, right? Like tooling for AI would probably be along the left axis. Maybe a research think tank would be up at the tippy top, and there can be great value in those. You know, we typically invest in more workflow oriented businesses than that. But you know, what would being at the top of this pyramid even be? And I'd posit from a commercial perspective, you know, it'd be something dangerous, right? It would be a little bit too much pure research, a little bit too much hammer in search of nail, and those things are wonderful for the world, but as investable early stage business opportunities, I think they can be quite risky. And so when I think about the Wing Strike Zone, for evaluating AI opportunities, ironically, we don't want things that are tremendously close to that peak. We want things that have the right balance of workflow, of data, and an appropriate use of AI and ML as needed. And so that's really the prepared material that I have, and I would love to hear from the audience and sort of dive into the topics that interest you guys most.
Thank you, Jake. That was a very interesting talk. Thank you for that. I have a couple of quick questions, and then there's a question out in the audience as well. Everybody's encouraged to ask questions. So my first question is typically, how do you find ventures, or do ventures find you, or is it basically a mix, or is there some kind of proportion? If somebody wants to reach out to you, in fact, there's two different questions. If somebody did, after watching this talk, Jake, want to reach out to your firm, is there a process through which they can officially request a meeting, or I don't know, submit a proposal of some kind?
Yeah, it's a great question, Vic, and it's something I think that aspiring entrepreneurs often think about, right? And my answer is, in all honesty, you're always being evaluated, right? And so I would think hard about how someone first approaches me. Are you going to send me a cold email? Right? And is there any context, right? Did you go, how are you building a rapport? Maybe you're going to mention this talk, and maybe that's enough. Fortunately, I imagine most of the people on this will know who you are, right? And so going through a trusted intermediary like yourself is a great way to get connections. I won't even describe the number of sort of random inbound things that I get a day. And so it's very hard for me to prioritize. If someone like yourself were to say, hey, Jake, you know, this gentleman or this woman that I know has this wonderful idea, there's a lot more credibility and qualification that comes with that. And in the back of my mind, I'm actually thinking, okay, maybe you're going to build something, you're going to sell it in an enterprise market, right? These have, regardless of how great your AI is, they're buying cycles, there's relationship building, there's a sales process, right? And so if you can't figure out an appropriate way to reach out to me, good luck trying to sell the CIO of a Fortune 500 company on your solution. And so, you know, we're not deliberately trying to be inaccessible in any way, shape, or form, and we love to hear from everyone. But the way that first reach out happens is an indication of who you are and how you behave. When I describe my job to other people, I say that there's, you know, hopefully there's enough inbound that I could fill my calendar up multiples of times a week with just the things that come over the inbounds. And part of my job is making time for the outbound, saying, hey, I'm very interested in space XYZ. I need to stay abreast of what's going on in the field, and I will in a selective manner reach out to whether it's a professor or an early stage founder to learn more about what they're up to. But it's an even mix, right? Another thing I would mention is sort of, again, comes out to like what goes in that initial outreach, right? You probably have a couple of sentences to get my attention. What should go in them? Well, I think probably not too much on how great the AI is. Hopefully you can convey that in some quick way, shape, or form. Ironically, most startups in this field don't fail because the AI fails to do what they claim it's going to do. The business fails because they really fail to identify a meaningful pain point and a practical and pragmatic solution to the problem, right? And so if I think the journey of building a startup is the systematic process of risk reduction, right? And how can I reduce risk as much as possible? If I meet someone that has a PhD in some ML field, I'm inclined on first meeting, I may dig deeper to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And so beyond proving some basic level of competency, what do I really want to hear about? I want to hear about what have you done to reduce all the other risks for all the other things that you don't have this special spike or skill set on, right? And it might be early days, and there might not even be a product, but maybe that means like, hey, I've talked to 50 customers, and I really deeply understand this problem, right? I know exactly what to build. I'm not in my ivory tower somewhere trying to solve problems with pure computer science. And the more that you can make it real, here's the hard work that I'm doing to reduce risk, the more likely you are to grab someone's attention.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jake. The next question I want to ask you is, I looked at the website, the portfolio. It's a very impressive roster, of course, of your team, but also of the ventures in your portfolio. And one of the things that struck me is that how much synergy and complementarity exists among and across your ventures. So, Jake, in a practical sense, though, given that you may be that common multiple across all of these ventures in your portfolio, how do you facilitate at a more practical level complementarity between venture A and venture B to really add value beyond what they could have done just individually?
Yeah, that's a great question, Vic. And I certainly think about it in the context of our portfolio and, even my portfolio, and can some of the computer vision stuff that one of my companies does help the other. And we have lots of unannounced things. We have like Ed's AI chips, explainability things, and like you can stitch them all together. And you can imagine people being customers of each other. First of all, there's an appropriate stage in opportunity. There's a time at which dialogue and learning is appropriate, and then when leveraging is appropriate. Building a startup is a risky thing, right? And if you were to insert a piece of a startup, very early stage, we'll call it sub $1 million ARR, into another startup, right? If that first startup has some sort of issue, you sort of the blast radius has sort of grown, right? And so it's really important from a trust and stage perspective that you invest in the right technology at the right time. I think we found that facilitating conversations amongst our portfolio CEOs is great. It's great learning. It's great sharing. There's collaborations on the go-to-market to go after maybe joint customers. But the point I make is we really step back and think about the business of company building in a macro sense. And I really like to put on my product manager hat when I think about the business of firm building. A lot of folks think that the business of venture investing is just deploying dollars, and there's a lot of phenomenal firms. They're huge firms, huge platforms with presences in other countries and many practices, multi-stage growth practices, consumer practices, etc. And there's a real reason why we've chosen to be completely early stage enterprise B2B and have this, $450 million fund size. And the reason is so that we can support our entrepreneurs, so that we only have, a couple dozen active companies at any one point in time. We bring 4 operating partners to bear, right? We have a customer network operating partner, a marketing operating partner, a talent operating partner, and they have real time to spend with the companies in the addition to the investment team of 5, because we have a small portfolio. And so I tell you, as exciting as it is to facilitate these collaborations within the portfolio, that's just, that's a 1/100th of what we view our job is, right? We view our job as to facilitate connections to our 50,000 person customer network, right? And to really match the company when it arrives with what are the things that we can do to accelerate growth. So a company comes in, maybe it slants towards technologists in the beginning. On average, that's what it's going to do. Do they really need my help to hire the next software engineer or ML guy? Maybe, sometimes, often, no. Like, they really don't need my help to do that. But maybe they need my help to hire their first sales executive or their first marketing executive, because they've never done that before. Right? Maybe they need help. Maybe they don't have a product that's ready for sales, but they're ready to have product market fit conversations to sort of engage in dialogue with people that will be a little bit more forgiving of where they are in the entrepreneurial journey. And we have and we continue to build relationships to facilitate that. And so, as much as it's important for us to foster both community and collaboration within our startup community, I think it's much more important and exciting that we foster that collaboration with the entire world. And we really think very hard every day about how to set up our firm to enable that.
That's great, Jake. Thank you. There's a couple questions here. So there is a question here, and I'd like to kind of frame this more broadly, Jake, is from a quantitative perspective, and you talked about what is the objective function. So is there, for example, some kind of a total addressable market?
Yeah.
What metric is it that is a bare minimum?
Great question. I hate these terms absolutes, right? I think if you polled a half a dozen venture capitalists, the number that you would hear is $1 billion. And why is this number $1 billion? Well, depending on the dynamic of the market, might be a faulty assumption to think that you can get most of the market. If you got 10% of the market, that's $100 million of revenue. If you think about that, that's sort of the basis against which a company can go public. But at the end of the day, we really sit down and think about, can this team and this market support a publicly traded company that can be fast growing? And for it to be fast growing, candidly, it's going to have to grow well past 100 million ARR in the fullness of time. It's going to have the right team and the right market opportunity. There's plenty of markets that we invest in, and we joke, we use the description. This is a $0 billion market. And what do we mean by that? Well, there's not a lot of spend in the market today, right? It's maybe it's not zero, but it's not a lot. But we do believe that the numerator is going to grow, right? And it's going to eventually be a $1 billion market in the future. And we're willing to underwrite that risk. I made an investment recently. We haven't announced it. It's in sort of a subsegment of the marketing space. And I think by any objective measure, it would be very hard to say that there was $1 billion of spend going on in this market. But we have a point of view that the market, almost didn't exist a couple years ago, and we see that the spend is going to move there in the future. And so the question when you step back is, maybe for a seed investor, something else is okay. We're in the business, not every company gets there, of building, enduring companies of great significance. And what are the things that you need to do to convince me that that's possible? And sure, some sort of basic market analysis is important, but having a perspective on where the market is going to go over the next 5 years is oftentimes the more important thing than where we're starting at t=0.
Great. Thank you, Jake. The next question is, in your triangle, you had the data and the workflow and then the AI at the peak. When we look at data workflow, are there certain industries that you are looking at more specifically, Jake?
We're excited by it all. I would say that not everyone is. There's a lot of people that are more comfortable investing in things that are sort of closer to what I would call traditional enterprise software. And if you look at the number of companies, and not that there aren't successful ones, and we invest in plenty, that target the things that people are comfortable with. There's a lot of sales companies. There's a lot of marketing companies. There's a lot of AI tooling companies. And when you unpack that, there's a lot of data quality companies. Like there's a lot of data ops companies. And like we could go on and on. There's a lot of these things. And do we really need 18 of them? I don't think so. It's as excited as I am about some of these spaces. And so for some of the spaces, the competitive dynamics, security is another great example, become more significant and more important sooner because there's so many companies going after the space. And on average, again, it depends on the space. You can have one winner, you can have two winners, maybe you can have three winners if it's a big market. To be the fourth player in a market is, it's certainly not something that I aspire towards. And so there are these other areas out in the real world, as I say, that I think are particularly exciting. One of the reasons why I think they're so exciting is because I think more investors are uncomfortable there. And so as I go to a place where more people are uncomfortable, I am hoping that there's more opportunity. I work with some companies that do computer vision things in manufacturing floors or in warehouses. I have some partners that spend a lot of time on the intersection of biology and data or healthcare and data. The interesting thing about a space like that is it's sort of a place where everyone is uncomfortable. There's some people that have a healthcare or bio background and they're uncomfortable with the data element. And then there's some people that come from the data side and they're uncomfortable with the bio element. Our observation, even for a lot of the sophisticated companies, we're early investors in what's now a publicly traded company called Seer Bio. It's in proteomics and characterizing the proteome. There is some really hardcore biology and chemistry. A lot of that was solved up front. When I think about the opportunity for the company in the fullness of time, a lot of it is data processing, a lot of it's enterprise go-to-market. Like those are things we know an awful lot about. And so by bringing the domain expertise together for some of these places, it creates a lot of opportunity. So we're very excited about all the traditional stuff, but we're equally excited about new market is the wrong term, but the markets that maybe some others are less willing to sort of spend time in. And we think we can form an opinion about almost every market in a week or two. There are a few things that we try to stay away from. And so like government regulation and government approval, those are areas that we are oftentimes going to shy away from just because that is not a type of risk that we traditionally like to manage.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jake. And it's very interesting that you framed this whole conversation in terms of risk management. I think that's great. A quick question for you here. So you've talked a lot about software. What about software, hardware type systems?
Yeah. And so we are an investor in both software and hardware. I'm on the board of a chip company, and so like it doesn't get more hardware than that. I'm on the board of robotics companies that I'd call robotics light, where it's still only going to be 10% of the overall sort of solution value as described to the end user. And so, investing in pure hardware is something we do. We do it relatively rarely, in full disclosure. But I think at the intersection, right, a lot of solutions need to solve the actual problem, right? And it's software, it's firmware in many cases, it's hardware. And if there's a reason why all these things need to be together, we're pretty interested in it, right? Like if you think about the first computers, like those things needed to be together, and like the basis of competition was like, does it turn on? And if it doesn't turn on, it doesn't matter. Like once we had things working, right, people specialized and sort of branched out and made piece parts, right? And there was different value in the stack. So if there's sort of like a rational reason why something needs to be packaged together, we're quite excited about those. And sort of IoT Edge is an example where I think there's a lot of things that make sense. There's some that don't as well.
That's great, Jake. So before I go to a few other questions, actually, a question came to my mind as I was reflecting on sort of the your mention of the importance of trusted sources for you. When you're looking at ventures, Jake, that are applying, how important is it that a venture has come through a well-known incubator upstream, like a Y Combinator or a Techstars or something like that?
So let me retract is the wrong word. Let me clarify. Things can come through any source. Any source is totally fine. The way you reach out is important, right? And if someone I am a dear friend with, sends me something, it's a lot easier, it's quicker, it's less mental energy for me to figure out if it's interesting. Like feel free to send stuff directly over the transom. It's more work for me to figure out if it's interesting. And so, the yield back is just corresponding. What I will say is it's very hard to evaluate, air quotes, the quality of someone's AI or ML. And lots of people have, attend very prestigious universities and have very famous advisors. And I decided a long time ago, decided like, none of that matters. None of that matters, right? Like the proof is in the pudding. And that can be very hard to prove at the early days, right? But AI, more so than like almost any other discipline I can think of, it's a real world application, right? And like, yes, I think there's a tremendous amount of contributions that have come from academia. They've come much more on the back, I think, of collaborations with the real world, because like we need data, like we need problems, and a lot of things that come out of academia, it's sort of the question: is this like pristine thing? Does it work in the real world? Do the assumptions about all the data that you have, it's like, is that really how the data exists in the real world? And so I think we're going to see innovation coming from a much wider set of places. It's not going to be just like, what are the 5 best known universities in the United States? Like the talent's global. There's a lot of people that can, again, get very, very far by just applying these techniques and having the right domain insight. And so I hope that AI is going to be democratizing in some way, right? And I always joke, if the pure competitive advantage of your mind, in your mind, is just like my AI is better than someone else's, I think that's a really dangerous place to be. It's like my AI is better than like Jeff Dean's AI at Google. I mean, like, that's in many dimensions, it's going to be a really hard claim to make. Google didn't even have, air quotes, AI in their search results until a couple of years ago. What did they have? They had a data advantage. Like they had a data advantage over everyone else in terms of how they improve the rankings, right? And so you can't just hang your hat on that. And if you have a great idea, find a right way to get in touch, and just like, share what you're excited about.
Great. Thank you, Jake. A couple more quick questions for you. This question is actually very interesting. I was thinking about this too. You talked about the importance of the partner network you bring to your portfolio ventures. Do you have some kind of a paid partner program where organizations can partner with your firm so they get kind of early access to some of your ventures, and in return, your ventures get access to them as a pilot or a proof of concept or a prototype?
Absolutely not, and absolutely yes. And what I mean by that is we will absolutely never charge fees to people within our entrepreneurial ecosystem, whether they're the startups or the large companies. That's totally not in our ethos. We organize large events with hundreds of CIOs or CISOs or whatever, and like, we spend a lot of time and money on those, and like those are always free. It's always about community building, and absolutely yes, in the sense that like this is the business we're in. We have an entire staff that focuses on building and operationalizing these relationships. And so if you're an executive at a large company that wants to sort of partner with us earlier, by all means, reach out, and we'd love to have those conversations and figure out the relationship that works for you.
That's great, Jake. I'm sure you'll be hearing from folks reaching out to you based on your invitation. So last question is from my side. And I really like what you touched on, because I think that for me was a bit of an aha moment when you talked about the data exhaust. I really like that phrase. I'm going to have to start borrowing it from you with full attribution, of course, Jake. My question is, do you have some kind of a framework, or how do you measure the worth of a data exhaust, for example?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's 2 sort of obvious sides to that. The first is like, what is the incremental value to your end users? What does this enable you to do that doesn't happen before? Like, what's the next level of automation or relevancy or whatever it is, that's the objective function metric that you care about? And you can think about that at a fuzzy sense. I don't know how precise you can get about it. And then how hard is it for the next entrant? right, to go. And so there's two sides. There's an incremental benefit to your end users, and then there's a defensible benefit to everyone else. And I think it's a nuanced problem. I think a lot of the really exciting work that's being done in different areas of privacy and things like that are going to be really important. But recall that, like, it wasn't that long ago, it was 2 decades ago, that everything was siloed on different people's premises. And now we have all of this information coming together in one place. And that makes the startup challenges who deal with storing and processing this information sort of like the sum total of everyone's problem in one place. And so we've made the infrastructure problem, like more centralized and more challenging in certain dimensions, but the opportunity to share the data, or to leverage the data, or to share the insights from the data in the right way, right? I think we're going to see a tremendous number of businesses built that literally just even happen to deal with like that particular flow, right? How do you, without sharing the data, share the benefit of the data with someone else? And there's lots of things that are, I think, really like science and research on this front, as opposed to products today. But it all does come back to these two things: incremental value to the customers and sort of defensible mode against others.
Great, Jake. And since we have a couple more minutes, perhaps I'll ask you one final last question, I promise. And the question is, I want to go back to a comment you made in a previous answer about sort of the so what, right? You want to ask people that, hey, so what? You're doing all this cool stuff. So in a practical sense, to the entrepreneurs that may wish to contact you, Jake, of course, they're going to talk about the problem they're solving. Are they really solving it? How they're solving it, etc. That's a part of their pitch. How important is it for them to now also show you, hey, in the Wing portfolio, here is why we feel we'd be a good fit for Wing, and it's because you don't have any other players in that space, or maybe you have some complementary players in that space. How would you advise them?
Yeah. So just to be really clear, when someone walks in the door, the first thing I want to know about is, who are you? Everything stems from, who are you? Like, what market are you going after? What sort of technology are you building? What traction do you have? Who are you, right? Like, what is the problem to be solved is next. Please don't show the AI until after you've described who you are and what is the problem you're going to be solved. Then show the AI, and you can talk about the traction and everything else. Investor founder fit is super important. I joke, but there's some seriousness. Like, it's probably easier to get in a divorce than to get out of a bad relationship with an investor. And so some people that treat these things as like 2-week rushes, I don't know, I think would be wise to spend a little bit more time getting to know the people that they're going to business with for maybe a decade or more. Fit can mean a lot of things, right? If someone comes and knocks on my door and says, "Oh, I think you'd be a great fit. We're a B2C company." Well, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We invest in B2B companies. Like, I have the next best AI explainability thing. Well, I just invested in one of those and I wrote a blog post about it. And so it's like very competitive with a company that I spent a lot of my time helping, right? And so there's some obvious things that don't do, right? But like, if you're a B2B company, if you're leveraging AI, it's not about like, can you help 4 companies in my portfolio or not? That's not really the point. But like, hopefully the type of resources, the support system we're building here will be relevant for you. And as long as that's true, as long as we're not investors in by like stage and domain, like an exact a direct competitor, that's really what we're trying to make certain of, right? And if you do come in and say something that we think is going to be directly competitive, we'll just stop you, right? Like, we'll let you know up front. We don't want to hear any sensitive information from something that could be directly competing with our portfolio.
Thank you, Jake. This was a very, very exciting and an insightful talk. I really appreciate your sharing your thoughtful and thought-provoking insights with us. And we'd love to have you back in a couple of months, Jake, so you can give us an updated sort of lay of the land and how you see the investment landscape changing. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to having you back. Thank you, Jake.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Vic.
Thank you. Bye-bye.